Welcome, everybody. My name's Claire Ebury, and I co-founded the LGBT Directors and Leaders Network with Matt Howarth. Matt, can you give us a wee...
Hi, I'm Matt. Nice to meet you all.
Okay. We started this network because we recognise that LGBT plus leaders, we face challenges sometimes that other leaders might not. And one of those is about visibility. So we need to know each other so that we can support each other to be the best leaders that we can be, and to be role models for LGBT people who are earlier on in their careers. I've got a few parish notices for you. We're being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded or have your face on this, please just turn off your camera. You can take your name off if you want to be completely anonymous. Secondly, nobody's told us that they have any accessibility requirements for today, but we have enabled the subtitles, thanks to charity people. So if you don't want to see those, if you go to the bottom of the page, it says live transcript, and you can just turn those off. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. So I hope that if there is somebody who needs them, that you find them very useful. In terms of timings, we're going to interview Anne for around half an hour, and then we're going to take questions from all of you. And then we're going to spend the last 10-15 minutes or so in small breakout groups so that you can all meet each other and we can join up and connect. So throughout this whole event, please put your questions into the chat. Matt's going to pick them up at the end and discuss those with Anne. We've got 2 events in the diary, so please put these in your calendar for now. July the 6th and September the 15th. It's at the same time, which is 11 o'clock. Tim Sigsworth, who's the Chief Executive of AKT, which used to be called the Albert Kennedy Trust, will be our speaker on the 6th of July. And we're just finalising the September event as well. So please put those dates in your diary. And then lastly, I'd like to thank charity people for all of their support. It's a lovely organisation. It aims to help charities to recruit more effectively, efficiently and inclusively. And they're lovely people as well. We've got Amelia here. Amelia, please let everyone know who you are. Connect up with Amelia. Give her your chat. She's excellent, and charity people are a brilliant supporter of this. So I now have to introduce Anne Lim. I think it's fair to say that Anne has the most remarkable CV that I've ever seen. When I was reading it over the weekend, I thought, I can't tell everybody everything because, we've only got an hour for this event. So I'm going to give you some highlights, but I'll have to leave some chunks out, otherwise we're going to run out of time. So Dr. Anne Lim, CBE DL. Anne is a Mancunian by birth, but she now lives in Milton Keynes. So she's made that move from the north to the dark side. So you can tell us a bit more about that, perhaps, Anne. An educationalist, philanthropist, business leader and charity entrepreneur. She is chair of the London Stansted Cambridge Consortium, which is the body behind the UK's Innovation Corridor. She's the chair of the Scout Association. She's been the founding chair of the South East Midlands Local Enterprise Partnership, and not many women have been in the chairs seats in the LEPs. She's a patron of Bletchley Park, which is the home of the Code Breakers. She's president of Destination Milton Keynes, vice president of the Helena Kennedy Foundation, which awards bursaries to students from disadvantaged backgrounds. She's received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Milton Keynes Business Leaders. She was named in the Northern Power Women Power List as one of the 50 most influential women born in the north of England. She got her OBE in 2011. And that was upgraded to a CBE in 2015, and that's for public and political services. And she is Deputy Lieutenant of Buckinghamshire. So Anne, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think probably after that introduction, we're all thinking the same question, where did it all go wrong?
Well, I can tell you what my mother would have said. Well, and she's got a bloody big head as well, In fact, my sister will remind me of that from time to time. It's always hugely embarrassing to listen to somebody recite your career, but for all of those who are out there and who have kindly given up an hour of your working day to listen to this old woman dribbling on, then I hope actually it is also encouragement and inspiration, because as you said, Claire, networks are about people connecting and learning from each other, whatever their age, whatever their experience. And I want to hand it to you and to Matt and the support of charity people for doing this event. So yeah, there we go. But please don't be put off. I don't really carry those things like trophies around. None of those things are really, really, really what's important in life, are they? They're very nice to have, though.
No, you're right. You're right. Tell us a bit about your roles at the moment. Obviously, I've done a bit of a summary there, but you know, where did you start and how did you get into this position that you find yourself in now?
Well, I won't go back to immediately where I started, but just where I am now, because I'm 68 years old, so I'm not in full-time work anymore, as the majority of you will be. I don't work for a single organisation. I did do earlier on in my career. I was a teacher in further education. I was a FE college principal. I was pretty young when I became a further education college principal in Milton Keynes. In the mid-80s, and then I had a career in the civil service, actually, but I was responsible for setting up an initiative under New Labour that was about connecting people digitally, and it spanned something called Learn Direct UK Online at the time, going back to the early part of this millennium, 2000s, and then I went into the private sector, actually, when at 50, I decided I wanted to have a portfolio career. So really, and that was by choice, because I'd been a chief exec and I'd led 2 organisations, 2 colleges. Cambridge Regional College came after Milton Keynes, and then I'd been a senior civil service where in fact I had a chief exec's responsibility. So I wanted to do governance, and I wanted to do good governance. And I wanted to do it from the point of view of somebody who had been in a chief executive in a leadership role and could transition to being a director, a non-exec director, and a chair. So that's why I now currently chair, in charity terms, the Scouts, as you said, which is a major youth engagement, mixed youth engagement charity, UK-wide. I chair, or I'm about to chair, the City and Guilds, which is an international group, actually, although known for its qualifications in the UK. And then I have 2 other chair roles, as it were, more in the private sector. You mentioned the UK Innovation Corridor, and also I chair an environmental regulator. So it's almost as if I am, I'm not allowed to say I'm retired, because it's almost as if I am doing full-time work, but it's a composite and a collection of things that I like doing.
Absolutely, brilliant. So can you tell us about your childhood?
Well, how long have you got, Claire? We've only got half an hour. I can tell you that it took years of therapy to sort it out, and it took meeting my wife of now 30 years, although we only actually had our wedding 2 years ago. We had a Quaker wedding, yeah, in terms of childhood, the shorthand version is, as you say, I was born in Manchester, in Moss Side. In fact, in Stretford Memorial Hospital, which Kate Green, who's the MP for Stretford, tells me they're about to pull down. So I thought I'd better come back up north just to have a look at it, really. But moved out from, for those of you who know the Manchester, Greater Manchester area, moved out to the Stockport Hazel Grove area, near where you are now, Claire. And went to a girls' grammar school in Cheshire in the 60s, because only Cheshire Education Committee were creating single-sex grammar schools at a time when the rest of the country was going comprehensive. First child to go to university in our family from that girls' grammar school. I went to Liverpool University, so I stayed in the north. And in fact, my first jobs were in Manchester. Came back to Manchester, and after I did French at university, so became a language teacher in FE colleges in what are now part of Manchester College. They have different names in the 70s, because obviously there's been an amalgamation of further education colleges during that time. So that's how I got into FE, and I lived in Manchester in the north and then the Midlands until the mid-80s, because I went to work for 6 years in Derbyshire, and then I made that move to the dark side, as you say. Maggie, who I then met when I came down to Buckinghamshire, is amused at the fact that I didn't think they had working class people in the south. I just thought everybody was posh in the south, you see. So I probably thought they didn't have LGBT plus people, and they didn't have working class people in the south. But of course, this is completely bonkers. But that's it in a nutshell.
Brilliant, brilliant. So how did your young life shape your career, would you say, and how did it influence it? You said you had a lot of therapy, so there was obviously some turbulence, but how would you say it influenced the decisions you made and the choices?
Well, I think it did, and well, of course it does. All our family experiences. I should have said I'm the elder of two. My father and mother had a family business. They had a butcher's shop on Great Western Street in Moss Side originally, and then, in fact, a butcher shop on Langreve Road in Stockport. Not far from where you are, Claire. So my father was really a classic lower middle class, I suppose, if you want to put it in those terms, but entrepreneurial, the working class Tory. You know, he was a remarkable man in many ways, and so I think my career has been influenced by him, except that I'm not a Tory. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Conservatives. Please don't get offended, anybody. In fact, I think they're doing a lot of things right at the moment as far as levelling up is concerned. But didn't share his political views, but have got his energy, his drive, his enthusiasm. And somebody once, and he had support of my mother, who really was actually pretty intelligent and could have had her own career, but actually put everything into motherhood and into helping the family business. So I think somebody once described me as an entrepreneurial public servant, and I had never thought of that myself. But actually, if I look at my career and what I've done, I chose to go into the public sector because of my values. I mean, I've never been remotely interested in making money, although I think it is very important for societies to make money and for that money to be shared. And indeed, I give most of our money away now, which is why I rather grandiosely, narcissistically call myself a philanthropist. But actually, that means also giving money and time. It's about what you give to others, really. I think philanthropy, that's another topic. But anyway, yes, the answer to your question is inevitably, if you're in an environment. Andy Burnham said this yesterday at a Manchester Guardian at 200 event I listened into a little bit, and he said, you know, things, we believe in the North that things can be better than they are. And I think that more or less sums up that I was in an environment where I wasn't actively encouraged, and I certainly wasn't praised for doing well, but where you could do better and you could bring other people up with you and make life better for them. I think that pretty much describes what it was like, and in a sense, what I have done. I don't want to sound big-headed about it, but if I do look back on that career that you've just highlighted, I think I've always tried to do things that also help others. Except I failed as far as LGBT is concerned, which perhaps we ought to come on to. Well, until recently.
Why do you say that?
Well, because I never admitted that I've had relationships with men and women, and I do consider myself to be bisexual, actually, if I was going to put a label on myself. But since I've been in a relationship with a woman for the last 30 years, my life partner is a woman, and I would be seen by others. But I was never out. I mean, you really, you know, you young people just don't know. This is going to sound, what's the word? Hectoring, and I don't want to, but you cannot imagine what it would be. You can, because there's still many people who really experience this at work, but you can't imagine really what it was like in society as a whole. particularly in the Thatcher years, with that wretched Section 28, if you were in education, you know, the thing that the Tories are quite, that prohibited the promotion of homosexuality. You couldn't dare admit that you were in a relationship with a woman if you were a woman, and vice versa. So I never spoke up, and I have written about this and it's on my website, in my own blog. I didn't speak up about being gay until 2 or 3 years ago. So that's what I mean by failed, because it just wasn't. It wasn't easy. It wasn't possible, and actually, I suppose deep down, I really was haunted by the fact my mother and my parents knew. I did obviously tell my parents only in my late 20s, early 30s, actually, when I got into really a relationship with a woman. I did tell them, I did come out to them, but they said, well, this will harm your career. I mean, actually, it didn't, but I think it's important in a network like this to know that people do experience that, they internalize that, and actually it probably is still true for many others. So it's only as society has shifted and attitude has changed extraordinarily, unbelievably, in terms of the climate, and that's astonishing and wonderful, I think, and we should value that, but also recognise that at an individual level, it is still hard for individuals, I think, to come out and to be sure that they're going to be accepted just for who they are.
And how did you manage that? You obviously had a home life and a work life. People at work ask you things about your home life. How did you handle that situation, being in the closet all that time?
Yes, it's a great question, Claire. With difficulty, with shame, and with embarrassment, and through lying. You know, I first had a relationship with a woman when I was in my early part of my career in Manchester. In fact, we lived in Sale, in Altrincham, and it was, well, 2 girls sharing a house. You know, so we never admitted to each other or to our parents at that time. Actually, that relationship after 7 years ended. And it was at that point that I moved south as well, and also was more open. This is in the 80s. But the truth is that it is very difficult living that double sort of life, or ignoring a part of your life. And I'll just tell you one very quick story, which is that I became principal of Milton Keynes College, as I say, in the mid 80s, 86, 87. And actually, you could be a feminist. I mean, I've always been a feminist, and I've always been passionate about equal rights for people with disabilities, trans people, whoever. I've always stuck up for the underdog type thing. But in terms of being gay, didn't say anything about it even when I became principal of Milton Keynes College. But I did promote, not because they were the right people, we did take on 2 other women who were my deputies. So that at the top of this FE college in 87, 88 were 3 women. Do you know what there were a group of head teachers who hated the FE college anyway, from the local schools, and they disparagingly referred to us as the 3 lesbians. In actual fact, the 2 other women were not lesbians at all. But, you know, you're living in that sort of climate where that abuse, basically, that prejudice was there. And, you know, none of us wants to put ourselves in the face of hurt or abuse, do we? And, you know, we don't willingly do that. So that's why I just sort of kept it quiet, you know.
This was an incredible time. I imagine many people on here have seen the programme It's a Sin, which is obviously set around that kind of time. We've got this incredible wealth of education just coming out of that programme. But you were right in the thick of this, trying to be a leader. And obviously there were young people coming up through this school that you were the head of, and you weren't able to support them. So how was that?
Well, as I say, it's something I feel very sad about now. And that's why 2 or 3 years ago now, when the further education college sector decided they ought to really recognise that at least half of their, if not more, of their actual customers, if you like, their students, were likely to be asking questions about their self, their sexuality, their gender, their relationships, because that's what young people do. That there was a responsibility, perhaps, to be more open and to say something. And I wrote about the fact that I hadn't been able to do this because the climate was so different. And I do feel sorry for those students who probably were in the colleges I led, and who certainly in Milton Keynes College for the first 10 years, it shifted a bit from 96, 97, when New Labour came in, and then to sort of 2000, 2001. What happened then, it was much easier to say, and I would say this, if people ask me about my personal life, you know, I would say, oh, and my partner, Maggie, and then I just add her name without drawing any attention to it other than that, and move on and think, well, you've got to deal with it, you know. So it did become easier then. But that's different from actively being an out LGBT plus leader in the way that some of the FE college principals are these days. And I really rejoice in that, because it wasn't possible. And I think it must make it much easier for people who work in the college or in any workplace, and certainly for the students who are being trained to go into jobs, to feel that they can be the person that they are because others are being who they are.
And I feel like I want to say back to you that on behalf of this group, although we haven't consulted, that you know, I guess we're proud of you saying all of this stuff now, and that was a very particularly difficult time that you were in, and you know, it's on the shoulders of people that have gone before that we've actually made the changes that we've been able to make in over the last decade or so, which puts us in a very different position.
Yes. Just say one quick thing. You mentioned it's a sin, and I do think that it's an education for many people who didn't go through that time. And I mean, it was brilliantly done in all sorts of ways. I do wonder if, though, enough is. Lisa Powell is very involved in that, and I think she's just been recognised. I mean, I have never been part of a gay scene, even being in Manchester in the 80s. I actually did go to the Hacienda, but you know, I never did the gay scene there. So I've never been part of a scene, if you like. But I do just want to say something about lesbians and women who have relationships with women, and maybe this applies to trans people as well, although I don't know, because it's not been my experience. And it's not in any way to either make a hierarchy between the whole LGBTQ plus community in any way. But I think probably there does still, I do think if you were a man and you had a homosexual relationship, because of the law forbidding it, I mean, it just was appalling. Women were never seen as being capable of doing anything, loving each other, that meant that it was illegal. I mean, it's madness, isn't it? Utter madness. But perhaps the lesbian voice, perhaps the trans person's voice does also still need to be, well, everybody's voice does need to be heard more. But I do think there's still a lot that we can do to make relationships between women and trans people, and any variation thereon, better. And working with the Scouts, with young people for whom gender fluidity, I believe they call it, and if I haven't got the phrasing right, I apologise. But what I mean is, I experience young people who are just totally okay in their skin and happy with everybody else around them. And it isn't a question of somebody being a bit peculiar or somebody being sniggered at behind their backs. And I do think that's truly liberating and long overdue. Sorry, I prolonged that.
No, that's brilliant. We've so I see that we've made quite a lot of progress over the period of time that you've talked about. There's been huge progress for our community. What do you think is still missing, and how do you think we, as kind of leaders from this community, could make a difference, do you think?
I just realised I couldn't see other people's faces. It was stupid. I was just looking at yours, Claire, which is very nice.
Lucky you, Anne.
I just realised I don't know how that came on to speak of you. Well, look, I actually don't think the battle's won at all, let me say. And so I think there is an awful lot to do. I think we're better as an inclusive community of LGBTQ plus speaking on issues where we have experienced prejudice or discrimination, or speaking up for our own experiences. I don't think you can do enough of that, because it's still a job to educate an awful lot of people on what it's like to be not them, to be different from who they are, as it were. I still have so much to learn from people who are not like me, and that, you know, that goes for somebody like, I don't know, Theresa May. You know, I've no idea what it's like to be heard. You know what I mean? We can always learn from listening to, properly appreciating somebody's own story, and telling that story as you experienced it is vital, whatever experience you had, and really trying to get under the in the shoes of and under the skin. So I think there's a lot to do with the networks like this. There's a lot to do with the sharing of experience. There's a lot to do with coaching and mentoring and buddying. I mean, yes, I mentioned the therapy, but I mean, that was nothing in a sense to do with being gay. I mean, that's just one aspect of my identity. It's much more coming to terms with who I am and who the other is, and realizing what stuff's mine and what stuff's theirs, and what really matters to me, you know. So there's so much learning about other people's experience still going on around other areas of life as well, whether it's mental health or domestic abuse or violence against men and women, or whatever. That at least we've got a climate in which we can speak out about that, and that really feels good, and we can hold people to account. You know, this is completely irrelevant, but you know, we do need more. Well, it's not irrelevant. I think the other thing is just having more role models. It comes back to that, although I do find it very odd, and these were my words when I accepted the award, that an overweight postmenopausal gay dwarf can have become a bit of a gay icon in my older age. Is still an astonishment to me, but that does not diminish the need to have the role models, and for you to understand, whoever you are, whatever your age are, you are role models for me too. I have put £100 bet on my friend Wes Streeting, who was the first chief executive of the Helena Kennedy Foundation, the charity I founded with, well, I founded it and gave the money, Helena gave her name, being the first gay Prime Minister. You know, we're still a long way off, aren't we? If we just measure things in terms of those pinnacles of power. So we need more role models, Claire, really. Sorry, dribbling on, but
no. I'm going to ask you one more question, Anne, and then I'm going to go to Matt to field the questions that we've had from everyone.
Right, because I haven't been looking at anything.
No, nor me, actually.
He's got them, is that right? Yeah.
So obviously we've talked about quite personal stuff here, and you know, shame and things like that. You're also the chair of lots of board organisations. I feel like this is two things that need to come together. We've got, most organisations have diversity policies, ambitions to be more diverse and inclusive, all of that stuff. And then you've got people's life experience, and it feels to me like, how do we really drive diversity and inclusion in organisations? How do we make that difference within organisations? How do you make it reality instead of something that's written on paper?
Well, we do need to do that, and you're quite right that at least there are diversity and inclusion policies now, but I wouldn't have said they were necessarily universal, depending on the size of the charity, the organisation. I mean, you said you used to work for the Institute of Directors. Obviously, we've got charity people here. It's very easy to have a policy, isn't it? So I think what you have to do is absolutely ensure those policies are enshrined and made accountable for in terms of outcomes, and that the people in the positions of leadership and governance are held account to those outcomes. So I know that if I take City and Guilds, for example, I think the title is, she's brilliant, which is all how I remember her, but I think her title is Chief People Officer. But anyway, we have and we are trying to properly implement a whole range of diversity and inclusion policies, and we're doing next month, we're doing an events like this. One of our Black trustees is Frank Douglas, great man actually. You go forward to good speaker. He's doing something on Black Lives Matter and the effect on him. I'm doing something a bit like this. You have to put yourself forward and get the questions and be challenged by others and be measured on the outcomes, not on the policy, on just what's written in the policy statements. And I'll just give you a very quick example. When Black Lives Matter has happened, or when, sorry, George Floyd was killed, and we all saw what went on. I'm not chair of the Sitting Guilds at the moment. I'm vice chair, but we had a board meeting literally within a couple of days, and at the end of the board, this chap Frank Douglas, I know he won't mind me saying this, said, "Well, are we making a statement on Black Lives Matter?" And the chairman said, the chairman said, who was a great guy, don't get me wrong, but he said, "Well, no, we don't do that sort of thing." And it was really difficult and embarrassing, because I thought, I'm the kind of, there's Frank who's black and there's me that's gay, you know, and the rest of the trustee board look remarkably homogenous, actually, they're not quite. But what was great was I held back and didn't challenge it, because I thought, oh, it'll always be me and it might not be the most effective thing to do. 3 white men, one after another, challenged it in an appropriate way, and then I could come in and say something. And in fact, we did put out a statement at the end, but that took some courage to do, and it does just show you, I think, how far we've got to go to answer your question about putting those policies into practice.
And the importance of allies standing up for underrepresented groups that aren't their groups, actually, because
yes,
it's only through change, it's the majority really that have to make the change. Matt, I'm going to bring you in. Could you ask some questions for us from the audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Anne. We've had a few questions coming in whilst you've been speaking. So,
right.
So Sarah asks, with you having felt that you've had to hide an important part of your life, do you feel that this has changed now? Do you think that people are able to say who they are openly and with pride? And if not, what do you think needs to shift in business and society to enable that to happen?
I think it's easier, Sarah, now for people because there are groups like this around, and because there's more people who are able to just bring who they are and be who they are to their work and in their home. But, and it's a big but really, I still, based on my own experience, I still think that every individual has to just make that choice about how much about themselves they want to disclose and in what circumstances, and whether or not actually it's anybody's business, actually, at the end of the day. We don't have to define ourselves by our sexuality. We don't have to define ourselves except in the way that we choose. But what we do want to do is make it possible for people to define themselves in ways that they feel comfortable with. And I think that's the big challenge, because at the heart of a lot of this, and the story I gave about the 3 lesbians, I mean, those men were jealous, they were afraid, they thought they were being clever. I mean, there's always some underlying psychological condition, isn't there? And to think that that's gone away would be rubbish. I mean, it clearly hasn't. Look at all the hate crime that's perpetrated. Look at all the homophobic attitudes that still prevail. So I think we have to have some solidarity. I think we have to try and encourage empathy and compassion being more readily acceptable as values in society, not just for the LGBTQ plus community, if you want to call it that. And then that will help along the way as well. God, it's like having a vibe of people in my PhD. This, I don't know whether that's the right answer, Sarah, but it's my answer.
We're testing you on your LGBT credentials, Anne. You'll probably pass.
I mean, being asked for a blueprint of how to reshape business and society to enable true equality is a bit of a being put on the spot question, I think, there, Anne. So yeah, top marks for your response. So
don't worry, Sarah, it's me who felt embarrassed about the answer.
Cool. So I'm just picking another question. So Lisa asks, I run an anti-bullying charity, and we've done a lot of work within the LGBTQ plus youth area. Do you have any advice for youth who are struggling finding their place in today's society?
Well, I don't know whether it's advice, but I do think a lot of young people are incredibly, inspirational if they are able to network with other young people who've experienced anything similar to them, whether that's being bullied for whatever reason, or whether it's because they have a disability or because they have a mental health issue. And that's a good thing. So I think the advice is we have to ensure that there are places, presumably like the organisation where you work, where people can feel safe, young people can feel safe, and they can meet others like themselves, and they have a safe and trusted adult, or adults as well as friends. Because again, none of that was available in 1960s, 70s, 80s Manchester and Cheshire, and so it's good that that's changed. And I think giving young people, this sounds, I don't mean to say in a patronising way, giving young people their voice, but actually listening to those voices and actually giving space to those voices is really, really important. And this is what I love about the Scouts, that it's a youth, we have had a massive programme of making it youth-led, youth-shaped. I mean, the fact we've got an old lady chairing the board of governors is by the by. The actual day-to-day, because that's a hidden bit, that's just keeping all the money and all the legal stuff and all the safeguarding and running board meetings. But the really day-to-day activities, the experiences, the challenges, the worries that young people have, the problems that they encounter, having an organisation that's not school. I'm not trying to promote Scouts, because I think there are lots of other ways of doing it, but having those places where they can talk to each other is so vital. And I don't really think we put enough money into our youth charities, our youth support services, our schools, really, to have non-formal learning. Actually, I don't think we start early enough either. I'm not letting out a big state secret, but one of my legacies from the Scouts, because I'm ending my 6 years in September this year, is that with our new president, who is, so you'll know what's coming when I say this, but who is, you have to have a royal, you understand, you have to have straight white royal, but with the Duchess of Cambridge as our new president, we're actually starting scouting between the ages of 4 and 6, because actually it's between 4 and 6 that a lot of the stuff that really hits you later on in life can be changed and developed differently. So we're starting squirrels before even beavers, and only in deprived areas, and only with children who wouldn't otherwise get a chance. Sorry, a bit of an advert there, but it does link to the youth point, the starting sooner, but that's not where the money goes, is it?
What's the age thing there, Anne? 4 to 6. Why are they such influential ages?
Because all your sense of I'm not a psychologist, so I've only looked at the data from early research psychologists, but that sense of feeling okay with yourself, your confidence, and I imagine this goes along with your sexual awareness of your sexuality as well, because you knew if you were a boy or a girl or a trans person at 4, very probably, or well, you might have been working things out, but we can't underestimate that at 4, we're in terms of child development, we're little human beings, but 4 to 6, in terms of developing that sense of inner confidence, self-esteem, the ability to sort of value your own creativity and challenge, and not feel a little person that's squashed and put down. That all happens during that time. So if you're given activities, it's to do with brainwaves and things. If you're given activities that encourage leadership, that encourage you to learn how to be with somebody who is different from you and not feel diminished by that, but feel empowered by it, all of that then stays with you for the rest of your life. But if you get it crushed, you spend lots of money trying to put it all back in. That's my version of what the psychologists say.
That's really interesting. I remember my ex-partner was a scout leader and visited a lot of jamborees, and back at the time I remember us having a conversation about whether he was going to go to the jamboree in America, where scout leaders could not be gay at that time, and it was a hugely sort of challenging kind of personal conflict for him at the time. And Phil asks something related to this, actually, around, what is the role, how can we continue both Great Britain and big business in Britain to help other countries now? Looking at things like the hate crimes and the Death Valley Raiser in Iran, which are still happening. The Queen's speech talked about reducing asylum seekers through our government, which is one route to help potentially that we're cutting off. And given your experiences in government and public service, I think it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Well, a great point, because we don't know how lucky we are here, even though I have said, and you will probably all have had experiences, that we still need to do much more. But the statistics are shocking for the way people are treated in other countries. And as you point out with the example of the Boy Scouts of America, even in a Western civilized society like America in relation to Scouts, although that has changed now. So I think we have to unite, don't we? It's why in this globally connected world we have to unite and challenge, and why the macro political alliances are so important, because if you've got bloody China and Russia together, you've got half the women world, and if they think that capitalism is wrong and homosexuality is wrong, I mean, I'm just being very simplistic, but it's not going to be easy. For what we know is the human experience that doesn't know country boundaries like that at all. So this is not an area I know much about, other than in general terms, but it is an area I think Britain should take a lead on, and leading LGBTQ plus people, and leading politicians, and leading influencers, and leading celebrities, and that should really, really unite. We need a much, much bigger global, we need a kind of the equivalent of the sustainable goals for climate, which actually are critical, but we need a kind of world committed goal, don't we, to making repression of anybody completely wrong, but particularly focusing on LGBTQ plus. I think that would be good if we had a world development goal for it. Somebody will tell me we now do have, but anyway, we need it. That's what we need.
Perhaps one last question, just developing that then. So one person trying to make that difference is Richard Hearn here, who's trying to develop LGBTIA plus inclusion for people in cycling in the UK, and says he's having problems getting taken seriously by the various kind of public sector bodies in that sport. Do you have any sort of tips as somebody that's managed to create change at that level in organisations and in the public sector to help Richard make that influence more successful?
Look, Richard, I don't know specifically. I'm very sorry to hear that. And it's wrong. It's very wrong, isn't it? So you need to find, one suggestion is you need to find a big advocate of cycling, like Alistair Campbell or Dave Brailsford, and just get them to champion it and say, look, this is wrong. Somebody whose voice is heard and who can take on that. You need to campaign. I'm sure you are doing, but you need a campaign and to get people behind the campaign and to challenge it basically. This can call it out. What I would say.
Great, thanks for that. So that's about all we've got time for in terms of questions. Thanks so much for the generosity of your time and what you shared there in responding to the network there. So yeah, we're going to break out now into small breakout groups. So obviously it's not as good being on Zoom as it is being in person at an event to kind of network. So this is our sort of best solution to that problem, which is that we're going to split everybody into small groups of about 5 people. And we could just ask that when you hit that group, that you just introduce yourself by your name, job title and organisation. Just quickly go around the group because that 5 minutes will absolutely fly by. So don't dive into a discussion just yet. Make sure everybody gets a chance to introduce themselves, and feel free to use the chat in order to swap any kind of contact details, you know, whether you've got a LinkedIn profile perhaps or Twitter, so that we can make sure that we all kind of grow this network and that we get to know each other and grow our kind of alliances as LGBTQ plus people in leadership. So yeah, thank you, Anne. This has been absolutely fascinating. I'm really inspired by what you had to say and touched with the honesty and humility with which you shared it. Claire, do you want to say anything before we split up to those?
No, I just thank you again, Anne. That was absolutely brilliant, and it's so wonderful to hear your voice and your experience on all of this, and just thank you so much for your honesty and openness.
Well, no, thank you. I just had a very quick look at the chat, and I just want to say, in answer to the point about Quakers, every other church acknowledges this, led the revolution for same-sex marriages. I mean, I think the Tories were so, for ceremonies, I mean, I think the Tories were so embarrassed by what they'd done at Thatcher that we've got to hand it to David Cameron, who made it possible, if the church approved, for you to get married. But of course, that's not possible in the Church of England yet, but it was Quakers who led the way. So if anybody wants to get married, go have a Quaker wedding, because it is the most wonderful experience imaginable. But that is an acknowledged fact, whoever asked the question on Quakers. So thanks, Claire. Sorry.
Thank you. Right, shall we break out? We'll come back for a little roundup at the end. So we're only breaking out for sort of 6 or 7 minutes, and we'll come back for a little roundup.